That's great. So, okay, it is being recorded. Perfect. So I will now just start from the last slides from the last course we had. And it was just to explain you, and here, please again, interrupt me for any question and so on. It will be a little bit, hopefully also with some more breakout groups today, but I would like to point here on the point of science inputs at policy level. We had this policy cycle, and the policy cycle, it is well defined also at EU systems, for example, that there's an agenda setting, a formulation of policies, and there is that we have, everybody has to undergo at national, but at EU level, impact assessment regulations. It's an obligatory process to undergo, to conduct an impact assessment, and then a sort of adoption phase, implementation and evaluation of the policy later on, and then support and maintenance activities. That is a typical one. There are more detailed ones, but scientists give also then certain inputs for those in terms of what we had. Just an example, this modeling task, the pesticides policy simulation, which I presented the last time. And you can recall this kind of cycle, and you can also now look at, if I explain the common agriculture policy, and I try to come with some examples from also the past, what we had, but also the new things on agri-environmental policies and how it is designed. If we look at those, we had this already quickly. The EU Commission has certain regulations, and within the frame of regulations, each state level in Germany, but you can also put it to other European countries, it's always in the general concept is the same. They start from the design, the drafting process, to the programming of environmental programs, to coordination task, and to really have the proper outline. And you see the manifold authorities who are involved in designing such a process. And you see that it is exactly, if you put this policy cycle now into a real example, you see how it is being set up. And it is not a very simple process. And there is a back and forward processes, of course. And maybe it is no approval, and then you have to go back to an iterative process and to adopt and to hand it in again. And there are ministries of finances who are really controlling it, whether it's legal, coherent with the laws, and there is a sort of accounting authority and Ministry of Justice, who are also, according to the laws, checking the adequateness of this kind of program. And where you see maybe in this stakeholder process, there are always like also technical and advisory groups involved, and then also conservation agencies of agriculture. That means you also normally put from the beginning, if possible, onwards in the design. You have also local groups involved in this participatory process. And this is really, the higher the participation, the more communication on the one hand side, but the more also in terms of ownership, you have also then the motivation to get it done. Then you have pay off technical departments, and the farmers are then here from the if the program is designed, but also the farmers should be here in the conservation agencies, their representatives, and there's always a very practical component. And then there's an implementation phase. You see the mouse over here. And then there is at the very end, again, a sort of evaluation. And the evaluation then goes back maybe to a certain adoption year in adaptation of the program itself. That's how it is designed as one example, an environmental program. We had then also this, because there are many groups involved, we had then also this green front in the parliament. They're really supporting to have a higher level of subsidies and a rent-seeking behavior. Why it is so difficult to change anything in the policy? Because people try to seek their rent, to look like in the milk quota, and to look for those, not to give up this right because it's an income source. And to abolish a milk quota is not easy, and one has to pay compensation. It's not easy to change anything. And the transaction cost most hindering is the communication, asymmetric distribution information. And the consensus in terms of decision is always the costly part of policy making. And we had this also the entry points, I would say. These are the entry points for to design policies in terms of the sustainable development. If you think now also, yes, I'd like to do a term paper, these kind of are the determinants for building policies. That means we can change consumer taste and preferences as an entry point. We can change the market system, the number of buyers, of course, to how to increase them or how to lower them. If we have market like meat market in mind, we have consumer income to be considered, and also the question is normally, what does it mean, for example, if we have organic products on the one hand side, and if we have those organic ones, we exclude also people, for example, as a policy maker, because lower income class cannot maybe afford this more healthy food. And the income distribution here is one issue to be considered. The price of related goods, of course, what we had already, the sugar tax is one issue that can be really unhealthy products, can be maybe also more expensive. And then it also can internalize exactly the health costs that at later stage will arise if you eat a lot of sugar. These kinds of thinkings, how you can also internalize in the product prices the costs of health if it's not healthy, is one issue that is often also discussed. And then the consumer expectations on the future, what consumers expect on the one hand side, what are the preferences, and so on. On the other side, on the supply side, you can of course play with input costs. You can increase the costs for fertilizers on the one hand side, then farmers use less fertilizers, then maybe less leaching into the water, and then also the cleaning costs are reduced as one example. And these causal chains are important. Then we have also the technology, how to make also with technological progress a certain lower cost possible, and to push technology with research. And then also the taxes and subsidies as such, the prices and other goods for suppliers, the price of other goods like supplementary goods. If I increase palm oil in terms of price, maybe there is another good that is then preferred to consume, and that is maybe less harmful in terms of the environmental degradation and deforestation. supplier expectations about the future, and also what do they expect in terms of the price, and how we can also advise those, and the numbers of sellers and suppliers in the market system. These ideas are again the entry points really to change the system, to have changed the entire food system as such, and of each of those variables can of course change and influence. Then we came a little bit to this more hands-on practices. What is really then environmental instruments or effects? We had then policy instruments like export subsidies, internal intervention, and external protection. You remember maybe those, I would say, traditional policy instruments in the Common Agriculture Policy at the EU level. And that means that we had the export subsidies lowered the market price, the world market prices, and it is harmful for example, net exporters, because they have lowered world market prices and they have losses. We had this welfare analysis and the correlations. Then if we go with a mouse over on the trade and loss of trade and specialization losses, this means that if we hinder to trade, we can do it, of course, then we have also welfare losses. And if we reduce the export subsidies, we have welfare benefits. And the production surplus is being reduced and environmental degradation is being reduced. These are just the gross causal chain impacts here. We can then have liability rules like the Coase theorem. You remember, hopefully, that the biggest problem was the asymmetric information and that there is no agreement between who takes the costs of environmental pollution, or do I have the right to pollute, or do I have, shall I pay as a farmer compensation to pollute? And the were liabilities, and the Coase theorem said, yes, there is an optimal point of agreement, and there is an optimal point where either in the laissez-faire rule or the damage rule, I would say, there is either the water work or the farmer pays compensation to the other, depending on the constellation. Okay, you should have heard, and you should also at least be able to explain grossly the major reason why this kind of, or explanation model, why it is, why we have environmental degradation and why we can have maybe an optimal solution, but it is very difficult to implement. The implementation of the external effects is the challenge in environmental policy, and the policies, the policy of small steps, that means how is our real policy and at environmental level or environmental policy, it is conditions, to set conditions and standards, to do filing, tradable emission permits, and environmental liability. These blocks are really the classic, the traditional instruments to be applied, and they have maybe, in most cases, they have certain control costs and design costs. It's not easy just to pose a law and everybody is obeying. It is more that these control costs differ across the instruments. Can you imagine what is the most efficient instrument out of the last 4 instruments you see here? Do you have an idea? What is the most efficient one in terms of cost? You see the 4 here.
Costs for the producer?
Yeah, the costs as such. What causes, which kind of instrument causes nearly no cost.
Maybe. Tradable emission permits?
Yes, exactly. The emission permits is exactly the tradable ones because it's a market system that you establish. And this is how factories dealing with this. They have an upper ceiling normally of CO2 emissions, and then it is being reduced by a certain amount. They have a certain pressure to produce and they want to increase. They have to buy from another factory, maybe that's phasing out a certain permit to be able to pollute. And this is exactly, if we think a little bit in this, it is sort of cost theory in a marketplace. And the issue is that it is also established, also in Germany and in Europe, but it is still not very much functioning because the pressure of this is not high enough. There are very low prices so far. And of course, the economy or the government is a little bit hesitant. Yeah, it's hesitate to just lower it dramatically because then it harms economy. You know, that's exactly the issue. What also policymaker has as a tightrope walk or as a trade-off to be considered. That I mean, okay, if I really reduce it drastically, I harm my economy. I don't want to harm it, of course, because these are jobs. And these kinds have to be considered. But this is certainly the most efficient one. And the condition standards filing, environmental liability, that's all normally these levels, they cause a lot of communication and control costs, and also then in liability, of course, cost of legal.
I have a question actually.
Yeah,
I've heard when I hear about like policy instruments and like the future, I hear always about like a carbon tax. Where would that fit into like these categories?
That's a tradable one if it's tradable. Yes.
Okay.
It's if it's tradable, then it's a tradable one. If you have a per se a fixed one, then you would internalize the tax on a product base, for example, not on a product level. You could also say what is also done in the car industry. They do, if they have not better engines in 10 years, I forgot the real deadline, and then they have an overall output possible. And if you have SUVs, the big ones, then you have a big problem because then you have to compensate it with others. But the overall amount is really counting. And then they have to pay certain punishments, and that's really costly. That would be sort of permit per product, you know, that you have the CO2 reduction to be achieved at a product level. But you could also think, if it's tradable, it's not like this, but you could think, of course, Volkswagen could be better, and maybe they could then sell this permit to pollute to another factory. Then it would be tradable. And the tradable ones are always the most efficient ones because there is a quasi market established. Okay.
Yeah, but it also makes sense for it to be tradable, right? Because it's just carbon that's going into the atmosphere. It doesn't matter like who's putting it in. It just matters the total amount that's
You're
there.
You're completely right. Yes, that's perfect, because it's a perfect thinking, because you have also the subsidiarity principle. That means you should act where the environmental problem is at institutional level. And if you look at the water pollution, of course, we have a localized problem. And then this localized problem has to be handled by those institutions which are there at a local level. You know, this is the most efficient way. But if it's tradable and CO2, you see each type of environmental pollution has a different need to combat, or a different need to tailor a concept.
Sure, yeah, of course.
Great. Thank you.
I would have a question as well regarding the tradable emissions permits, and because you said it's connected to the cost theorem, but isn't it like that the amount of pollution is not well, is kind of given because of like the amount of, for example, CO2 certificates given out. So it's not like coming to an amount over the market. It's more like the given frame of the
You're right. Exactly. You're completely right, because it's in the nature, it is exactly this. But if you look at those, this is a cost theory, not what we had. But you're completely right, because the tradable emissions could be also the upper ceiling could be also here. Do you see my mouse over?
Yes.
Okay. It could be also here, because it is from the government a certain ceiling that is just fixed. And depending on the negotiations, in the climate negotiations, for example, it could be, and these are the NDCs, the national contributions, not each country, according to the Paris Agreement, they have to come up with the NDCs, and these are the national contributions to reduce it. And then the NDCs in Colombia is, for example, forest. In Germany, it might be that it is emissions in terms of the factories of car industry. No? And if they say now, I don't see my mouse here. If they say now, here it is, then it would be not cost ideal. That's completely right. But if they would, the ceiling in terms of the tradable CO2 emissions, if it would be here, then it would be an ideal situation, but it is not obligatory. Maybe it deviates from the optimal solution. Okay.
All right.
Thanks. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think like I think I understood that it's kind of a combined thing. Like you have the barrier of the maximum given out certificates, but below, like the cost theorem is working. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be. I'm just thinking now loudly, just to make it understandable. It would be here. It was a farmer, no, and he has a right to pollute, or maybe he has to pay a compensation. It could be also the car industry here, and they can pollute up to this level. But then we have also I would say now the air cleaning industry, what is not existing, no? Of course. But then they would have costs in order to reduce it. This is the world community. And these were the costs to reduce it. And then we had this, I can explain it maybe better. Where was it? 1 second, I just look for then you would have this constellation or this constellation, and ideally it would be that they pollute it up to this level where the costs can be covered easily, and that would be that we would be able to have the break even. We would be able to be below 1.5 degrees in climate warming, and this would be maybe this ideal point here. It is not to pollute too much, and also the cost, maybe if we would be able to filter it, the cost for those would be here, no? And this would be then the constellation that we have the activity right to rule. If the car industry would then produce maximum, they can then reduce it by this amount, and they would have to pay this green area to the world community, because these are the costs. And the other way around, if the car industry would not have any production, but they would now increase the production of cars, they have then emissions, and then it would be exactly the other way around. They pay a compensation, no? You know, activity right or cause of polluter liability rule. Was it a bit clear? A little bit, I think so.
Yes.
Not maybe perfectly explained, but this was my intention to explain it, that this ideal point at the coast theorem is perfect, but of course, if we would have this upper ceiling, it might be to the right or to the left of this ideal point, because to find it is nearly impossible. Yeah. Okay, you had another question or comment?
Yeah, maybe a bit following up on that, like, yeah. Because I think it's like really important if we really have the liability or the activity right rule.
Yeah.
And so, but I don't know if we look at real life examples, if there's sometimes like if we look on the whole thing, like maybe in specific cases we can decide, okay, we have this or we have that.
Yeah.
But sometimes we have kind of like a mixed. Is that true?
Yes, a mixed in terms of instruments, or a mixed.
A mixed in kind of like the starting situation, that we don't really have a liability.
Yes. Yes.
Rule, or like the activity right rule, like
yes,
can do something like the polluter can do.
Yeah.
Because they're not that much standards or conditions.
Exactly. This is one of the biggest problems, because normally if the problem is already there, you have already a very high standard of pollution. And then to get rid of this is what I meant with rent seeking. You cannot tell them, those polluters, easily, okay, now you stop your production. Same with farming systems, with a policy here. It was highly supported, the agriculture sector. There were established certain interventions, high level of support. But then if you say, okay, now we reduce the support, there's a lobbying, and it is always depends on the reference level. And it's very hard for a policy to define a reference level that we say, okay, now we freeze this level and we reduce it. This is normally done, no? That you have a reference period, you take the average of this period in the past, and then this is a level of possible pollution, and then you have to reduce it in the next 30 years by 10%, something like this. This is how it is often done. And but you're completely right. We are acting as a policymaker in this world here, always in a setting where we start with high pollution levels. We never have an ideal situation. This is what you meant, no?
Yeah. That we kind of start with the situation now, and then maybe, I don't know if we can fundamentally think, okay, why or who has to pay for what, because we start at the situation now and maybe not.
Yes.
But with knowledge that we just gained now, and not the situation or at point zero.
Exactly. That's a very good point, because you cannot tell then afterwards, if we have a problem, now farmers, you have to pay. Because you're the polluter, you cannot say it, because you allowed it for like 50 years to produce, to pollute the environment. And then you cannot say in our legal system, now you're the polluter, now you have to do it. You can only say, okay, we set up a new rule. This rule is now from next year onwards valid, and you have to it's your commitment to follow this rule, and then you can do it. But you cannot later on liability to pose somebody on certain things that was allowed for many years. And that's always a question: who is paying what then? And in most cases so far, it is what I said: it's setting standards, conditions, and liability is, of course, if somebody is be able to prove that you act grob fahrlässig, is that you act on purpose, or that you deviate from the good practices, no? And you should follow those. Yeah, that's a very good point. And exactly, this is always very unclear in the liability rules. And you know also, the people from the States, that you have a completely different system like in Europe. In Europe, you're a lot more protected as company, then in the States, there you have a completely different legal system on liability. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. That was a very good point here. And I just wanted to dive into this kind of, it's only from one publication here, but you see the regulations already. If we look at the policy framework, the sticks, the carrots, and the sermons, and this is normally what is being done. Sermons is always giving nudges, giving hints. Please don't do it. Please do this. Please live healthy. It's education and so on. And then there is this intervention. The carrot is to set incentives on certain behavior or certain obligations, and this is costly, and this is also control costs involved. And the sticks is the do not do this and this, and if you do this, there's a filing involved. If we look at those, and we had this already, we can use like the market system, we can intervene in the market systems in a sort of classification. It's like subsidies, subsidy reduction. I gave you also some, it's like export subsidies. This is what you also, with reference to what you said, Dominic, was exactly, we had high subsidies, export subsidies. We distorted it, the EU system, the market, the world market system. We said now in a reference period, now we have to phase out the export subsidies, but step by step in the next 10 years. And with having phased out those, there is a reduction and of those market distorted effects. That would be something like this. There is in this environmental charges, entrance, the tax, national parks, you can really say, okay, we had this in the public goods as a definition. We have those public goods where we can exclude people and others not. We have this example of the national park, and also we have the example of air. Everybody can breathe air, and we have really, there's a free rider principle. And we have in the park where we can say this entrance is used for maintenance and mitigation of environmental negative effects, for example. We have this user charges, deposit and toxic pesticide box. We can also really say, yes, we can have taxes on those. We can have here the same. We can have targeted subsidies, really, that we have subsidies for multitude of environmental programs with different activities as a set of a bundling of activities. And then we have this creating markets, a property right decentralization, milk quota system. Everybody has a right to produce, and he gets a certain permit to produce. This, of course, has caused welfare losses. Let me remind you in the welfare analysis. We will also dive into this very quickly. Tradable permits, most efficient instrument what we had, and the international offset system, compensation for ecosystems, the landfills. There's this clearance mechanisms of the UN system, that there's paid compensation if you manage landfills a better way, and so on. There's really also for no pollution, certain compensation paid. Environmental regulations, the standards, is a classical one, nitrate thresholds as a clear standard, and it is at EU system, these a certain concentration of leached nitrate, and if it's if the threshold is exceeded, then there's accusation, a formal accusation to the member state from the EU legal system. Bans, active substances are banned. Pesticides, certain pesticides are completely banned. Then it's not able to use them anymore. permits and quotas, milk and sugar quota. Also, the sugar quota was there, it is phased out. That means everybody can produce now sugar beets, but to a lower price. And it is less attractive for most farmers. Therefore, and the zoning, it is where we have certain sensitive regions in terms of water, for example. It is not possible to applicate pesticides, and the voluntary agreements. The voluntary agreements, the cooler programs, for example, those programs which are environmental, agri-environmental schemes, but where the farmers would like to participate, as one example. Or voluntary agreements do exist normally in that farmers, together with a water work, is just doing an agreement, and they have an agreement, and with those they get a compensation for this. And this is exactly, again, to reveal it, the cost theory. In some areas it works at a voluntary base, but you cannot do it entirely to internalize environmental negative effects or pollution completely into the market systems and into the prices. So engaging the public, public participation is very important now. It is that authorities, NGOs, and others are really willing, and they would like to have an influence, and they are engaged also to have also a consensus about the program. It is very important today, and it is gaining importance. And the information disclosure, it's like sort of campaigning and nudges, hints, and also, for example, that you have a double print of a printer by default, that you have this as in a program already, that you say, yes, if I have a printer, the printer automatically is steered by default that it has a double print on both sides. That, of course, reduces it, reduces the use of papers. There are many of those nudges, and nudges of please be healthy, eat certain food and other food you shouldn't eat, and so on and so on. And this is done by exactly those small hints from different authorities. Then revision of environmental status, labeling, fair trade labeling, you all know these, of coffee and so on. And the certification, it is also not only fair trade, it is also that you have the standards, maybe social standards and so on. You enlarge the standards on different labels, and you have standards on environment, on social, and on economy, etc., etc. Okay. Do you have on this certain classification schemes and the examples? Do you have some questions here?
I have a question. Yeah. Where would the carbon credits fit in here?
Carbon credits. The carbon credits, I think, well, if it depends a bit, but you're completely right. It might be the creating the markets if it's a tradable thing, for example, that you have a quasi markets. If not, maybe others have also a problem, a suggestion. It might be that you have also, you can put it as using markets as a tax. It depends where how do you think the credits?
Wait, can we talk about what carbon credit is? Is it the same?
Yeah, because
it's like the tradable permits, or?
Yes, it depends on the type of the credit, the carbon credit. You know, you have the problem of carbon credits, but you can now maybe pose it into different, or put it into different instruments. What do you think?
I mean, I think it's something to do with the market, you know, creating markets or using markets between there, I think.
I would say so. if I think in now the general carbon like CO2 problem, I would also go to say, okay, in the wetlands, we should keep the wetlands like they are, and therefore we pay compensation to preserve this kind of area, because if we open this or if we recultivate this area, then there's an enormous CO2 emission possible. And then we say, yes, this might be then, might be protecting the area and might be a national park. Then it is differently. But depending on the problem, from which kind of angle you see it, you may have different instruments, no? Is it understandable? If you look, for example, at the level of the NDCs, of the national contributions you have to make according to the Paris Agreement, then you would have the national and then tradable permits would be ideal. If you look at the source where it comes from, the CO2, then you need maybe protection instruments in order to better protect certain areas that they are not cultivated, and that you have then also maybe hindered the CO2 emission from a certain landscape. Then you would need a zoning, or you would need a protection, that means a tax for a national park, in order to have income to preserve this area. I could also think in a different idea to say environmental regulation. It could be also a certain regulation: do not cultivate of those zones which I designated, and then it would be an environmental regulation. That means you see this kind of policy instrument, this kind of environmental instrument, can be the major problem, the carbon credits. Depending on the angle and perspective you see it, you may have also then different policy instruments. Is it understandable?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Is it understandable? That might be exactly this. You talked about the general problem, but if I look at it from different perspectives, I need also different policy instruments. And you see it is more complex than having only one instrument tailored then.
Okay, I understand.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
And this, it depends very much also for others, very much on the subsidiary principle again, where it comes from, where is the major problem. There one should act accordingly. That means protecting the area to not be able to release the CO2 to the atmosphere on the one hand side. But if we have already a high pollution level at a national level, then it would be tradable permits. If we look at ecosystems, we could also say, yes, if we look at what we had already, I'm just thinking now, environmental regulations, we can also set standards in order to produce certain products, but with a lowered amount of CO2 per product. That would be the product cycle, looking at product cycles and having laws how to produce certain products and having reduced CO2 per product emissions, no? And so on. That means there are manifold ways of looking at different perspectives, but setting standards. And then also paying compensation if already people have, or factories have high emissions, CO2 emissions, then paying a certain amount of money to be able to reduce, or also paying compensations, what is actually done in the Paris Agreement, to say, please do not cut the forest. This is what the NDCs in developing countries is being undertaken now, to say, please don't cut the forest, but you will receive a certain amount of money in order to keep the forest. And then not to be able to release the CO2, but also to be able to have the CO2 bounded or bind to the forest itself. Okay, And that would be, the last one would be the RED Plus project. It would be to have certain projects designed in order to maintain this kind of area together with communities, RED Plus or RED Plus Plus projects, to have at least have mitigated negative effects on the forest. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much for the questions, because it's really nice and we dive in a sort of interaction. And then also the environmental instruments related to common agriculture policy, we had then these instruments now, and we had regular instruments, hybrid instruments, and economic instruments. This is exactly regulatory, are these environmental standards, then we have the hybrid ones, it's cross-compliance, I come to those later on, and then the economic ones, these are like tradable goods and allowable tradable allowances and so on. But this is what we had already, but a different classification scheme. And this is, you see the certain standards. The cross-compliance is, I come to this more in detail later on, but cross-compliance is that you receive certain premiums if you have cross-compliance, a commitment that you keep. That means if you keep Greenland, then you're also able to receive premiums from a different crop. If you don't keep the Greenland, if you don't keep 5% of highly ecological farmland, then you will have also not a premium that you receive from elsewhere. Okay. Then these regulatory instruments, what we said are the environmental regulations, the specific standards that forces farmer to improve environmental performance. This is what we had already also in our discussion, is how to bring from a reference level farmers to an improved level, that we reduce environmental pollution, and the technology standards is like input standards, place restrictions on technological progress, that we may also have certain crops in breeding that use less or need less pesticide, that we have certain technological progress involved, and that we also set certain technology standards in terms of what to be used. That means soil compaction, maybe we should use different tractors that do not compact the soil that dramatically with different wheels and so on. That means also standards on technology can be set. Performance or emission standards, so that what we had already, and on manure, of course, we have the nitrate directive at EU level that also gives certain conditions of in terms of cross-compliance, but also in terms of standards not to have upper ceilings in terms of thresholds. For example, cattle per hectare is bounded to an upper level in order not to have leaching as nitrate into the water, the open water bodies. Okay, if you look now in the hybrid instruments on embedded regular types of requirements, this cross-compliance, what I already explained is that we have European, the CAP, the Common Agriculture Policy. A farmer is required to implement certain environmental best management practices, and then they can receive direct payments, also from other activities. No, it's not only from this activity, but also from others. They are generally then allowed to have a certain income from EU premium system. And the baseline eligibility on requirements, that means participation in environmental markets, trading schemes, what we also have. These are certain hybrid combinations from standards and also market systems. Last but not least, the economic instruments on the agri-environmental policies. These are taxes, tariffs, what we already had in many examples. And the tariffs, we had also the negative welfare effects, and also what we discussed also, that per product, if we have liberalization or maybe tariffs, per product, it is a price difference of up to 70%. The prices would be a lot more expensive if we would not have trade. On the other hand, we have to consider that if we have trade, we have environmental pollution, and we have also to internalize these external effects. You see, there is a certain trade-off between having trade allowed and also having trade hindered, but internalized, maybe also having higher prices at product level. Environmental subsidies, we mentioned these subsidies for practices, public investment in structural adjustment and greener agriculture systems. And this we have in our agri-environmental schemes. We will have an example later on those. Tradable allowances, allowance programs, tradable emission trading schemes as one idea here, what we mentioned. And then in your free programs, in hybrid measure, that is like a tax in some aspects, and also offset programs to have certain activities set offset and set aside, for example, then set aside of land, of agricultural land. Then public investments in R&D, very important to accelerate technological progress, and the trade-offs between general environmental policies. And this is very important. We had this idea of coherent policies and conflicting policies. We have in many cases conflicting policies, but in our systems at EU level, we try to be more and more coherent. I come to this at later stage. That means that we do not have, for example, supported young farmers in order to have increased farms and increased production. And at the same time, we pay the same farmer an environmental program to be more environmental friendly. There are many of those conflicting goals, but the big issue is to have these conflicting goals more coherent in the different steps of the agriculture reform. Okay? Any question to those? No.
Yes,
yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
So regarding the greenings of the direct payments, would that be cross compliance, or it's
the greening? The greening would be not cross compliance. The greening, we come to this later on, these examples. What does it really mean? Greening is more that you have, for example, a coherent policy with, I think, if I'm not wrong, with animal welfare or with certain practices, management practices, but it would be not cross-compliance. Cross-compliance is a certain commitment you have to keep. A commitment would be from your entire farm, you have 5% of your farm allocated for nature protection in a simplified way. If you do this, you have you have fulfilled this commitment, and then you are able to receive other premiums. But the greening would be a direct financial issue, a direct premium for a certain activity that greens your, in brackets, that greens, of course, your production. That would be, I just say just an example. It would be that you say, no, I don't want to have monoculture. I do intercropping now, or I do different stripes on my field, on my plot, and I do a certain crop there that is good for high biodiversity. That is directly paid, this greening, for a greener production and for biodiversity. Yes.
Okay,
that's different. Yes, thank you for your question. Then we have just aspects now for sustainable development. Those will be now more in detail picked up from Michelle next time. But this is exactly the weak and strong sustainability, the definition. Of course, you know all this, social, environmental, economic one. Then we say, yes, between social and environmental, we have a bearable situation, we have a social and economic, we have an equitable situation. And between economic and environment, we have a viable situation. But then sustainable would be if we are able to consider all three aspects. But then the big question for policy is strong or weak means, can we, for example, substitute now certain issues? One example would be that we say, yes, we have a certain amount of forest, but we are able to cut a little bit of the forest in order to have also leisure. That means that we build a hotel and things like this, and we have leisure aspects involved. That means there's also satisfaction of social issues. That means shrinking the nature capital to have a positive effect on social and economics is possible in this weak sustainability. A strong sustainability would be no. There's an upper ceiling. That means we have the forest to be preserved, to be protected. If we have this forest, it's not allowed to anyhow reduce this nature capital. This is the strong definition of sustainability. And of course, having in mind those, there's population, industry, food security, and you know the species and ecosystems. And the question is how it is done in real life. In most cases, the sustainability concept in most cases is like done in Germany, at least. If you have an idea, you can just say. Somebody is, no? Do you have an idea how it is actual sustainability policy making done in Germany? Is it more strong sustainability or weak sustainability? No idea? Okay, it's more weak sustainability. That means if we have, for example, a Tesla coming to Berlin, there is a certain amount of forest you need, but Tesla has to pay a certain compensation. For sure, they had to do afforestation programs on other fields, and there's a compensation possible, but it is possible to cut the forest. No, and this is always done, and this is a weaker sustainability in our real small policy or actual policy. It is that we always look for compensation schemes if it's possible, and there are very few cases where it's not possible. That's, for example, the primary forest. Some areas we have, this is UNESCO forest in Germany. It is under protection, and of course, there is no way to just cut this forest. But in most cases, there is always a certain compensation possible of natural capital. Okay?
I have a question.
Yes.
Related to that. So, like, doesn't it also depend on like what the type of industry that's going to move into the forest will do? Like you said, Tesla is like electric cars, so maybe in the long term that might be beneficial. But like if it's a company that's like, I don't know, that has like really like dirty production process, would they have to like compensate more because they're like a more dirty company, or how does that like work with the compensation? Do they actually look at what's going to move into the forest, or do they just?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think you're right, but I think first of all, I think Tesla is really polluting elsewhere. It's a really perfect example of externalizing negative effects, no, because of the batteries, and that's, for example, if you look at Antofagasta, In Chile, they are really producing this seltenen Erde, the minerals they need for those, and they are high rates of cancer and so on. That means it's a perfect example, but per se, this is of course a clean technology in terms of, and also a needed technology as such. Right now, it is a trend, and you have to go to do this because of economic competitiveness. And on the other hand, you're completely right, and I'm also thinking loudly here. There are certain Planfeststellungsverfahren, you know, certain procedures you have to undergo. It is always and certain environmental impact assessments and so on, obligatory processes. But you're completely right. I think so, that if there would be a mining industry, and if it would be a coal industry to be settled in this forest, it would be not possible. And it depends very much on the motivation of the policy. And it is a great success what happened to Brandenburg to have Tesla in their state. That means they have also high incentives also, and also payments, but maybe not monetary payments, allowed to have Tesla settled in Berlin. No? And this is something, you're completely right. It depends very much on the factory, on the technology itself, who comes where. And it is always a very, I would say, tailored and always very specific case with specific certainties or uncertainties for the technology itself to be able to settle there. But generally, everybody is happy if industry comes because of jobs. But you're completely right. It is who is coming has an enormous result or effect on the uncertainty or on the success per se, whether it's possible to settle.
Okay,
yeah. Thanks. But you know, I cannot tell you more because it's just also now my assessment here. But of course, it is yeah. And I think it's also the same in the States, more or less. But maybe I would just say the States is more, in general, even more friendly to industries. And I think the level here in terms of food safety on the one hand side, if you talk about food systems, but also on environmental standards, I think it is more bureaucratism or administration involved here at European level. But it's also my guess here. I cannot tell you this now from a expert perspective. Yeah. Okay. Good. This is yeah.
One question. Are there examples, or is there an example which we can consider as a strong sustainability?
Yes, a strong sustainability. What I meant is would be, for example, certain forest areas in Germany. That would be in this way. It is not possible to cut them because they are UNESCO good, public. Well, it's not public good, but it is protected. Then it's not possible. But if we would now think in others, maybe you have also ideas in others. Other ideas of where it is not possible to because it's a good question. I'm thinking. I think yes, for certain industry it's not possible to settle. But the problem is always if we look now for examples. I think we have to look for examples if we change our system, that the system change is not possible. It is banned. It is simply not possible because of certain reasons. Yeah. There is maybe you have also ideas, streets, to construct streets. It's not always possible. You know, there are nice examples on hamsters that big projects were not able to to be built because there are certain hamsters, wild hamsters in the field, and they discovered it. And then there is a certain, the environmental agency is really stopping the construction, and then there was a compensation, then there's a resettlement of those animals, but it takes years to bring them then to other fields, yeah, or plots. Yeah, you had also a comment, Dominic.
I think it was Robert. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, yeah, the most traditional example, of course, is just like conservation areas or like national parks.
Yeah.
Where they've like strictly restrict
Yes.
any type of negative behavior and environmentally speaking. But I'm trying to think of other like less geographically based.
Exactly. I was also thinking in less geographically based, but I don't have a better example right now. It is interesting. It is not easy. It is always possible, but for example, the offshore windmills, the offshore machines to produce electricity in the sea have a negative effect on whales, but they are there. But of course, they need then protection areas. Yes, but I think it would be good to think about it. I will check it also for maybe next time that we can discuss it. Strong sustainability, where it is. Maybe we can check this, okay? If you are interested, you can also check, and I will also check, and we can just discuss it next time, okay?
All right. Yeah, actually think about it, and I will check. Yeah,
yeah, that's great. Yeah, I don't have a better example neither, but we will check together. Then it's just an example. Complexity. It is this sustainability is really awake, you know, based on this Bundland report, and it's really vague because the idea is it depends on so many levels of policies and also interpretations of sustainability, and you have always extremes that Brazil is cutting the forest on the one hand side and considers also themselves as a high biodiversity country, and they are interpreting this completely different than in Germany. And it is really depending on the interpretation, and it depends on the legal instruments one have, on the knowledge, on the instruments, on the education itself, and financial instruments. And I just wanted to give you this here as an idea of that this flexibility of this concept is quite different, and we come to this in conventions, protocols, and what we have to be able to, at a global level, to be able to achieve it, so with some examples later on. But the sustainable agriculture is always here as a central part in our policy setting, but with lots of conflicting policy goals so far. And this coherence and is important, and the barriers are important. And what I mentioned in actual policy making, the lobbying is the green front, the people who are really supporting agriculture by having also supported the voters support certain parties, and lobbying and rent seeking. These are the major points as barriers here. And also, of course, the opposite interests there, no? That people are just not interested, and they are doing industries lobbyists, for example, and to have those as a very highly complex system, as just as an hint. And the aspect is just aspect of sustainability here. SDGs are, and these are the NDCs, the national contributions on reduction of the CO2 emission. and that is in all countries, and there's a global commitment now, and there's a certain commitment also at industry level and at development country level. That's very important now. There is a north-south equity established, and there is a big commitment that industrial countries now also pay a certain amount to developing countries in order to preserve their goods, no? The forest, for example. And that was not as a commitment before in the Millennium Goals and other goals. It is a certain time that now there is a global commitment established. And the ecosystems function as an aspect also that it is commodities and non-commodity output, that agriculture is seen not as a producer only, but also to have fulfilled also certain other ecosystem services. And I stay with this here because also Michelle will take this up on to keeping clean water, the water clean, to have lowered the environmental pollutions and so on, and to have also a cultural service involved here. If we look at those law enforcements, I just bring here the global issues on the differences between convention, decisions, and the directives. This is just a line of certain issues. I just bring here the Ramsar Convention. Ramsar is to preserve the wetlands and to have a convention. And do you know the difference between a protocol and convention? What do you think? What is the difference? Just maybe you can guess also.
I feel like protocol is more like stepwise procedure, or like it has more like specific, I don't know, I'm just thinking about what protocol means. More like maybe it has like more specific instructions, and conventions are more like.
Yeah, you could think in this way also in a procedural character, you're right, but it's more that protocols are binding, are legally binding. Okay. Like the Kyoto Protocol, if everybody signs, you have then an obligation, really commitment to reduce your CO2. And the Paris Agreement is also a protocol. And but conventions are like the same, like framework regulations at EU level. They're more general intentions to better protect wetlands, for example. And within this convention, you then settle certain programs. And then you say, okay, the UN level maybe sets certain Ramsar Convention in order to preserve the wetland on Pantanal, for example, in Brazil. And then there are settled programs on those within this framework. And there is, if you look at those, the Montreal Protocol, that's exactly on the ozone layer to have, for example, change the fridges with FCKW free, no, this not these emissions involved to destroy the ozone layer. That means it is a protocol. That means there is a legal commitment that countries do not use these emissions anymore. And then there is a Montreal, that was a Montreal one. Then we have the Bundland report. It is more a report on the general intentions to do, but there's no binding character. Then we have the Convention on Biological Diversity. They tried certain country cluster and countries try to do certain programs to better protect biological diversity, but there is no legal commitment on doing this. There's no threshold involved, nothing. So if you look at those, then we have the first CO2 one. It is a Kyoto Protocol. This here, see the mouse over here. That was the first protocol on the climate agreements. And it is that it was phased out, and also the states left this protocol then, and there's not a certain commitment for the United States, but most countries doing this, and the Paris Agreement with a different characteristic, of course, has redefined the commitments, the NDCs. And if you look then on the convention on pesticides, it's again a vague, but it is of course the intention to ban certain pesticides and to better control the use of pesticides, and the organic pollutants in the Stockholm Convention and so on. But you see how it differs. And that's just to make you understand that we have a strong distinction between the conventions and protocols. And there are also declarations, but the declarations are, of course, a more vague form that are less than conventions. No? Okay. And the Paris Agreement is 2016 as a last, well, important for sustainable development agreement that was done in 2016. Okay, this is just the aspects for sustainable development. Let me explain again. And it's important that you may try to understand it now, to have this from the theory what we had, that was normative theory, welfare analysis, and positive theory, like modeling exercises. We dive then into the general problem of how we judge policies, Higgs and Pareto. We had manifold examples now on trade and what kind of instruments have what kind of welfare effects. And we had now a repetition on policy instruments, how we classify policy instruments and what kind of effects they may have. And I would say now that we come to this Common Agriculture Policy, the CAP, to have made hands-on learning. But I would like to tell you here with that maybe we have a 10 minutes repetition on environmental policies in breakout groups. Do you agree on those? That we say, okay, we try to repeat it. What kind of instruments do we have? Or do you think it's not worth to do so? Just your opinion. Have an idea?
I would like to do so.
Okay, that's great, because I think it makes sense to have breakout groups and that you have an internal discussion, and later on. It is that please, environmental policy instruments, discuss them again. I can also put, what do you think, what is more in terms of criteria of classification? You can also develop your own criteria, because it is not the one and only criteria I gave you. You may also have a certain criteria you would like to consider. And then also to just look at very briefly on the most effective ones, which are the most effective ones, which imply the highest costs. And we have now 10:50, no? More or less. If we would have 10 minutes discussion, but we meet at 12, around 12, I will call you back. Is it okay? And I will stop here with them, because I only do the lectures. I will stop the, if there's any comment, let me know. Further comments? No. Okay, so if we just look at this now in real policies, and how much would you personally, just as a discussion or just as your opinion, how much would you pay for a really nice landscape? You know, that you're living in a city, but you say, well, and I live in Berlin, but from time to time I go abroad and go to the lakes, and I go to other countries. And how much would you pay for open and nice country landscapes? Would you pay for it in general?
It would depend on how much money I have.
Yeah. I think you got to think of it as like percentage of your like disposable income, maybe.
Yes.
But I feel like I wouldn't want to have to pay anything extra, because I feel like it's like a kind of a right. No, I don't know. It's kind of a hard question.
It's like a willingness to pay question. No, it's like, would you pay for a nice landscape?
If I knew that if I didn't pay, there would be a major threat to it, I definitely would.
That's a good. It's a very good answer. Yeah, exactly. If you would stop it, it's exactly because you already pay. Obviously, no, maybe not you now, but in general, in average, the consumers, they pay for it, no, and how much would it be in terms of percentage? You know, the question is, would you allow to pay 1%, or would it be 100, 500, 1,000? Of course, it depends on exactly on the salary again. But the question is how to distribute it also among the societies, no? And within the society, who is paying what for what kind of in agriculture? That's a big question, no? How much do you think we pay in average? Just guess.
Like already?
Yeah. Per year, no? I just say per year. How much do you think what we pay as in average? No, that some pay more, others less.
In order to keep the landscape the way that it is?
Yeah, for agriculture as such. No, not only but it is highly connected, no? You're right, it is not 100% only for the landscape, it is for agriculture policy. To have clean, to have healthy food, to have nice landscapes, to have...
Man, I have no idea. I would have to think about how much I spend on groceries and like add it up, you know?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Is it not more in the taxes?
Pardon?
Is it not more in the tax?
It is, exactly.
It's like maybe 10% of...
Yeah.
I don't know. If you guess like 10% of the taxes you pay maybe go into policy making of agricultural, and then that doesn't always result into conserving, but also...
Of course, the German government pays, of course, a certain amount to the EU system and of the entire taxes, and but in average it is quite interesting that we come to this. It is not that little, no, that we pay for agriculture policy. Yes, in average, quite a lot, no, and we'll come to this. And if you look at those, no, this is exactly this kind of open landscapes. It is a visualization what you see here, and this is quite often done in order to get the willingness to pay, no. And of course, you can say in the picture D would be also not it's not ugly, no. But the question is it, if we look at the agri-environmental schemes, what we have, is it that we should pay for the open landscape? That is exactly the big, it's not a problem, but it is a big issue. And there's on the one hand side, there is a justification from the EU system. Yes, it is needed, and it is a willingness to pay of individuals, of course. Others say, no, we want to have the forest here. And this is exactly this discussion on COs and NCOs, commodity outputs and non-commodity outputs, and that it is the ecosystems as one discussion of what kind of additional effects do we have? Do we want to preserve a high and keep a high biodiversity? And do we want to have leisure, be able to have leisure effects in landscape? What do we need? And there is a multifunctional agriculture. That means it is not only one function of production. And this is also then to legitimize these subsidies on a certain way, that it is, of course, a very specific and a special sector on the one hand side. But if you look at the CAP, how would you then see, well, CAP is more important than culture subsidies for culture, like the opera and all this, and health, and so on. There is a big question of how you prioritize exactly those issues, no? And maybe, what do you think? Do you have an idea? Is should people be asked on this willingness to pay, or should governments decide? What do you think? Well, it's your opinion, no? Yeah.
I think there's like definitely a kind of a limitation on like the willingness to pay, because like at the end of the day, there's probably quite a gap between like what people would say they're willing to pay, and then like when it actually comes down to it, will we ever actually have an opportunity to pay for it, you know? Or like how far in the future will that be? Or I don't know. Exactly. That's always my like WTP exactly. Is
it's
you never actually have to pay it, or like sometimes you pay it, but like it's indirectly, or it's like split up into different costs. So
exactly, and this is exactly also the reason. Now, the willingness to pay, if you're asked, you might have a very high willingness to pay, but there's a distortion between exactly actual result and also then the real preparedness to pay. And on the other hand, it is also, the more you ask, the more critical views you get. And on the other hand, if you don't ask people, then people feel that the EU system is doing something really completely different, and it is a big, complex governance system that does not take up the needs, the people needs. No, and this is also heavily. It was also in recent years heavily criticized. The EU system is not understandable. They don't do. They don't center the needs of people, but it is not. But it is. They have problems really to transmit it and also to make it transparent, the policy and how it is functioning and so on. No? It is not easy, because it is for most people very far away, and it is not, you cannot grab it easily, no? And that's a big problem of the EU system. But if you would see also that the structural policy, what is done, and social cohesion, that those areas get, or regions get more, who have a very high or a low average income, structural measures on village renewal and so on. There is big amounts, and the infrastructure, what is settled in Portugal, in Spain, for example, it's really, really high efforts the EU system is doing, but they are not really, to my opinion, able to really make it very transparent. And there are people who are really, you know, the AfD and parties like this, they don't want it, no? And they are really suspicious, and they criticize. Yeah, that is always the problem of really making it transparent and also convincing people, and they do it, of course, with participation. The EU system is highly participative in the way that the decision process is highly influenced by many different organizations. But if you look at those, it is around 40, now it's below, it's 40% of the entire EU annual budget is used for agriculture at EU level, and that is quite high. although it's 1% of all public expenditures of the EU countries combined. That means in percentage, it's quite little, but if you look at the overall budget, it is still the predominant budget the common agriculture has. And in average, in Germany, one pay 150, but it depends. Some pay maybe 300-400, others pay a lot less. But 150 euro as a taxpayer, it is something, you know. It's not very little, and everybody in average contributes very much to agriculture, to the food safety system, to the landscape, what you see, to maintenance of ecosystems, to also income motivation is also quite, because there's an income disparity between agriculture households and average EU households, to also have a direct income transfer. There is a high subsidy level at EU. And well, personally, I think it is good, but of course you can criticize it. And I would like to give you now a short overview on the major CAP instruments, but also then some examples on how the environmental programs are designed. And it is a bit, it's not easy to, because it is many regulations and many different areas and funds involved. It is not easy to cope always with an updated version of the CAP, but I tried to do it in the past and the weekend. And just to explain you also for those of you who may not know it quite well, I think others do, because of if you study agriculture economics, then you have heard it many, many times. But maybe others who came from states or from other countries may hear it the first time, I don't know. What is have you heard the Common Agriculture Policy and how it is designed, just as a feedback?
Yes.
Yes, some of you, yes. And others maybe not. Somebody never heard about it? Okay. I think it's quite obvious that you have heard about it, no? Yeah. Okay. But if we look at those, and I will just spend 1.5 hours in this, and if you need a break, you let me know, okay? Good. Otherwise, I will dive into this. That, of course, in the early 60s, we had this high price support. That means after the Second World War, especially, there was a strong protection of agriculture in terms of food security, and it was highly supported. And this support, of course, changed into high surpluses of the farming systems because of intervention. You have heard the instrument of interventions and high support levels of export subsidies to get rid of surpluses to the world market. And this has a strong effect on, of course, the world market. And that means there was a certain crisis of overproduction and exploding expenditures and this high support that when say we need a reform on those. That was 92 on price cuts and compensatory payments. That means the payments were normally paid per quantity. That means per ton of cereals there were a subsidy. And there was a change of this, we call it decoupling, from the quantity to the area. That means per hectare it was paid a certain premium, and not anymore for the crop itself. And this decoupling was very important to change, because then the farmers had a certain orientation towards the world market prices and not anymore to this high intervention prices that was paid by the EU system. And that means also to the same extent they had an orientation to the world market prices, and they had it was more market-based, the entire system. That means beyond this, there were always then market orientation achieved. It was decoupling. That means, again, here the premiums per hectare or per the single payment schemes per area. It's an average. Cross compliance, what came in, this is what we had already, that you have to have compliance with certain rules. For example, that you have 5% of the farmland protected, and then you get a certain premium. And then also health checks, but the dairy quota, that means the milk quota, was abolished as a big step, and the sugar quota was abolished, and environmental protection came more and more into the game. A shift from production-related subsidies towards environmental motivated premiums or subsidies was paid. And this is what's going on now in 2013. And we have recently, there's a greening targeting and food chains from farm to fork approaches, looking at transparency. And what we have now, the eco schemes. The eco schemes, we come to this later, is recently agreed the new reform step where one say, yes, the Green Deal at EU level, they come with new agreements in the CAP level. That means from this Mansholt plan to McSherry plan towards the Agenda 2000, again, the division into two pillars, we come to this, means the direct payments on the one hand side, and then also the rural development programs on the other hand. And within both pillars, there are certain programs tailored for environments also. And that means the cereals, milk and milk products, there's a market support prices. They were harmonized, and the payments were harmonized among certain markets. Now, nearly all export subsidies are phased out. That means there are big, I would say, there is already big success of the agricultural reform in terms of welfare, because there are very few, I think, in milk powder, I think there are slight surpluses, but in most cases, there is no export subsidies anymore paid. It is really phased out. And the decoupling is really, in terms of the subsidies, not distorted. It is still a little bit, but not very much distortions in the system, in the market system. And the single farm payments and the cross compliance are the major instruments towards this reform step, what was successfully implemented. There was this sugar regime, also the sugar beets quota. But what is the effect of those coming from subsidies to general single payment schemes? And I just have here this this example of decoupling, and you see the slide, no? And you see from normally you have the or the intervention was, but you can see it from the other way around. If we reduce a certain intervention price, a high price where farmers produce more, that means they do it because they realize a higher price. And the higher price has also to come with higher inputs. That means this is a production function here. That means the product price and the quantity of inputs is a reciprocal. That means you see here the production on this X, and on this X you see the product price. But it's a reciprocal quantity of inputs, if you look at the inputs and the input price. That means you had here at this point a very high level of production, a higher level of input prices and a higher level of input quantities, and they realized a higher product price, the farmers. This is why with this intervention, with this additional support of certain crops, they had to realize higher quantity to also higher inputs. And this is also the explanation why we had also very high nitrogen levels, high inputs of fertilizers, high inputs of pesticides. And then they mitigated exactly those. They changed it to decoupling. And an effect is that one say, yes, the prices are now lower per ton cereals. That means this is P1. And you also have, because of you reduce your production and you reduce also the inputs you need to produce it. That means there is less inputs the farmer is because he has a lower orientation of the price. That is exactly the effect of showed with the production function, the effect that decoupling has. And this is a central page here. That means we have the two pillars of the common agriculture policy. And please have it in mind, because if I now go further later, you see the pillar 1 and pillar 2. And then you see in pillar 2, 4 axes, sorry. The pillar 1 is a direct payment on agriculture policy, market support, direct support. And pillar 2 is rural development programs. That means rural development is tailored. It comes from a different budget, from a different fund, and it is tailored to increase the competitiveness of a certain region in the agriculture sector. It is tailored to enhance environmental and countryside support and land management, to really have environmental programs, to enhance quality of life. That means village programs, and to have leader programs. Leader programs we neglect here, but this is more the issue that you can, for example, new product development. You would like to, at a community level, to produce local wine, and you can hand in proposals at community level, and you can get money to get this kind of projects, your village projects done in a simplified way. And on this pillar 1, you have the market support, like export subsidies, which are phased out, intervention, which is also being changed, private storage support, this is more food security, and processing aid, food aid, promoting school milk, and so on. And the direct support of the single payment schemes at EU 15 and single area payment schemes. Area payment schemes is that you have a certain, or single payment schemes that you have a certain reference period, a certain area, you build a certain average of paid premiums, what we had at the very beginning. Also the question from, I think, Dominic, was it, that you have a certain average of a certain area, and this is a reference, and this reference is kept, and then you reduce the price, but you pay a compensation. And this is what is done. You pay, the farm is receiving a compensation, but it is not coupled. It is a payment for the farm that is decoupled from the quantity the farmers produce. This is important. You see here a very new version of what's ongoing. I will just simplify it also here. You have the direct payments coming from the EAGF, from a certain fund. We come to this, and you have the leader program here, but this amount here is the rural development. And you can now transfer as a new reform step from the direct support, you can transfer a certain amount to the rural development that is voluntary. That means a member state now can say, okay, we would like to shift from one budget to the other budget, to the rural development programs, because we like it and we like this tailored approaches for environmental programs. And how it is done, the law enforcement is normally that EU, very simplified, set up directives or guidelines. Again, like in the conventions or protocols, the directives are binding. The framework regulations, for example, are more frameworks where the member state has to find on their own certain instruments to comply with the rules. That means you have specific objectives at EU level. You build indicators. I would also come to this as an example. You have output indicators to be achieved, and the member states take it up as in their legal framework. They build then a certain plan, they build their instruments, interventions, and they comply with the rule given by the EU. That would be the framework or directives. I just give you two examples. The regulations are like, do you have a good example on the frameworks? It's like there is a water regulation, but there is a nitrate directive. You know, you have a more not that binding rules and objectives as regulation you would like to achieve. And then you have also certain directives. The nitrate directive says, if you exceed a certain threshold in open water bodies, you will have an official accusation, a legal procedure from the EU to the member state. And the member states, they have this legal problem. And then they have to comply with this rule, the member states. That's a directive. And there are decisions that are legal acts which only apply to specific individuals. Okay? Any question to those? No? Good. If we look at those, then at the overview, we have the Agriculture Fund as a EAGF. They deal with the income and the market support measures. And then we have the EAFRD, the European Agriculture Fund for Rural Development. And this deals only with the rural development measures. That's quite obvious. But there was also the question on cross-compliance and on the different instruments. If you look now at the market measures, we have then like the school fruits, agri-food supply chains, but this is a very low share. The market regulations on markets, then the regions and small islands, like specific programs, tariff rates and quotas, and the promotion of EU farm products. That is really the promotional aspects. But if you look at the income support, there it is, you see the greening and you see the cross-compliance. This is exactly the income support. There are young farmer programs. We don't look at those. They will be, of course, also supported to have also young farmers in the business to keep production alive. Then there are basic payments and farm advisory systems, of course, but the major points are here, the greening and the cross-compliance. If you look at the cross-compliance, what it is, and this is what we had also as a question, this is these management requirements on health and plant health. That means also on animal health. That means also on hormones, how it is ruled and governed, on diseases, on regulations on prevention, control, and eradication of certain diseases, and regulation on also animal welfare. and the environmental issues. And this means nitrate directive is you receive, if you keep the nitrate, and this is the regulation, the binding, the commitment is, if you keep a certain concentration of nitrate in the water, if you're below the threshold, then you also receive the payments, other payments. If not, you have a problem. Direct on the conservation of wild birds and the Habitat 2000, and the directive on the conservation of natural habitats. These are designated areas for certain species in terms of biodiversity. These are cross-compliance rules, and we have the agriculture environmental conditions in the cross-compliance. This means the standards, and we have heard the standards already. That is to prevent soil erosion, maintain soil organic matter, maintain permanent grassland, protect biodiversity, and protect management and water. You have certain guidelines and rules you have to comply as a standard. And if you don't comply with those as a farmer, you do not receive your premiums, no? And there is the penalties of non-compliance. Direct payments can be cut. Most rural development payments can be, if you do not comply, also cut. And the wine sector payments, restructuring and conservation of vineyards, and green harvesting. You have certain levels where you have a reduction or a complete abolishment of premiums if they just do not pay, if you do not comply with the rules. Okay? Have you any question to this? No, this is cross-compliance. And then we look at the greening as a most important, as a second most important instrument. This is greening as payments in practice. And you need to know that this is now in pillar 1. But in pillar 2, in the rural development, you have also specific agri-environmental programs, but they distinguish from those. What is better for those? Well, we come to this later, but the greening payments in practice are crop diversification, permanent of grasslands, areas beneficial for biodiversity. That means you have certain area you have to preserve in order and then you receive a payment. Crop diversification, you have a high diversity of crops, you receive a payment. Maintenance of permanent grasslands, and so on. Okay? Is it okay? These are the programs now, the two major programs in terms of environmental policy. That's quite important to understand. And in the rural development, I don't think that you will now see maybe exactly when I open it, but I'd like to just to give you to have an understanding here, an overview. The priority focus areas are defined at EU system. That means they define a certain, I would say, goal. And this goal can be then, in the rural development area, achieved by member states or states' instruments. The flexibility is higher normally in the rural development program. I just open it and maybe you see, do you see it? The internet?
No. But no. I think you could show us, if you go over like to your screen share button, maybe you can like choose which window you show us.
Okay, maybe possibly. I can just I open it now and I will just try.
Like you might have to reshare your screen and then you can like
just try, because I try to make it happen that I show you the this is, if you click on this, you have this page. And this rural development page, and this is to the priority focus areas summaries. And you have certain priority areas, knowledge transfer and innovation, farm viability, competitiveness, and so on. You don't have to learn it, but there are certain goal settings. If you open on those, you have certain defined goals in general. Maybe we can just open one, like biodiversity, restoring, preservation, enhancing biodiversity. And we go there, and there's a fact sheet, but there is a goal. And this goal is very precise. And that means it's designed to restore, preserve, and enhance biodiversity, including the Natura 2000. And in areas, in other specific constraints, high value farming, farmland, and so on. And the target is to manage 70.7% of agricultural land and 3.4% of forest and other wooded area to support biodiversity and landscape. You see, there is a certain really precise information at EU level you have to comply with as a member state. And this is quite interesting because the member state now, they are looking, okay, how can I achieve this? And this is not always easy to achieve it, but they have to comply with this, but with an instrument they developed also, no? So I stop it because now I wanted to do an exercise to let it match, but I think we don't have the time again to do so. But I will now just now you see the slides again, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Great. Then having said this, just keep it in mind in the Common Agriculture Policy, we have the two major columns and we have different axes in the pillar 2, in the rural development program, and we have different levels in the pillar 1, in direct support. And this means the two have very similar programs. That means environmental programs. And they are conflicting and coherent goals. But there are also many conflicting goals. And the major steps I want to do is to harmonize and to have joint goals achieved that is coherent policy. That means, for example, the young farmer is supported and they enlarge because of the support a certain amount of cows. And they say, okay, now I go into production of cows. This is one program. And the other program in rural development says, yes, we have to mitigate the level of manure input per hectare. This is very important to lower the environmental pollution and the leaching into the water. That means these are conflicting goals. You want to keep the young farmer, you want to support, he enlarges the production of milk production, and on the other hand, he produces negative environmental effects. On the other hand, you have the program to mitigate the negative environmental impacts. And this is exactly what is now being done in the new agriculture reform, to look at the coherences and to look at conflicts and to hopefully mitigate if possible. So if we look at those recent steps, I meant this, the reference areas, these are the single payment schemes, to transfer this decoupling involved, the direct aids and market related expenditures make up to 31% of the total budget. There was a cut. The total budget of the CAP was reduced drastically. We will see export subsidies are phased out. Intervention mechanisms are diminished significantly. That means they are not completely gone, but there are just few interventions possible. That's on wheat and butter and skimmed milk powder, the MMP. And then the abolishment of the arable set-aside. It was in previous times because of surpluses we had agricultural land was completely set aside or nearly fallow land, and now it is exactly under cultivation again. And abolishment of milk quotas, it was introduced to limit the milk production because of surpluses, but of course there are negative welfare effects. And the conversion of market interventions into genuine safety nets. And we don't go into detail there. And the Green Deal is looking at the policy coherences and the eco schemes we will introduce. If you look at this milk quota abolishment, this is just to pick now an example again, what we had in theory, in order to be able to evaluate certain programs. We had this as an idea of, we had a certain surplus, and we had a certain, also a certain importing country and exporting country. Exporting can be the EU system, and importing is a I don't know, in the a country with less milk production. Then we have, of course, if it would be equal in the blue line, it would be exactly the same amount. It would be the world market price, more or less. You have a not distorted situation anymore. If you get rid these surpluses, you come as an exporter in the EU from this surplus to this surplus. You reduce the surplus of milk, and the importing country is being also increasing the price and producing more on their own. Okay? And if you look at the traditional welfare analysis in this sense, you have then a certain consumer surplus from importing to exporting country. The importing country has E, F, and G, that is plus, and the exporting country has minus A and B. Now it's seen as a reverse effect. Now, if you pose a tariff or something, or if you pose export subsidies. If you have a producer surplus, you have minus E and F, and the exporting country, it's plus A, B, C. The government is not gaining in this game, but in the exporting, yes. And the overall welfare, the national welfare, is plus G and minus B, D, F, G, H. And the world welfare is exactly the minus F and H, minus B and D. You see, minus big F and H, and minus B and D. And this is what we had already, the losses of specialization or the losses of trades. Okay? This is just an example to reveal again what might happen in the sense if the EU, like the exporting country, is posing export subsidies to the world market prices, and the importing country, and to look at the overall welfare analysis, what kind of effects may happen. Okay? If we look at this, we have in the milk removal from the quota system. That is here the limitation. You see mouse over. You have a certain, you cannot produce more here. You have a limitation, but you have a higher price. That means the consumer prices are by trend higher. Then you say, okay, now I leave this quota, then it would be this supply. It would be a lower price. It would be an increase in production to the left. The consumer may consume more milk. This depends on the elasticity of milk, of course. By 1% increase of price of the price of milk, maybe it is not this high increase of consumption. But this is just an example. And you would have, then you see here again the different welfare ideas. We don't go into detail there on the welfare effects, but if we would have this, we can also go for a supply without the quota. That means if we abolish the quota, and this is what we had an immense increase in terms of technological progress, but in terms of immense increase of the total production, because the farmers tend to compensate their losses now in terms of reduced prices, and they enlarge it dramatically. And this phase is really the structural change in the milk production. You have heard it, I think so, but I just wanted to reveal and to bring examples now on policy instruments with regard to also then environmental effects of those. Now I give you some trends by those trends in terms of what happens over time. We have in general, if you look at the entire international perspective, we have commodities being slightly increased, but we have more imports in the EU system by primary goods, other primary, and also commodities. We have a higher trade as a general trend, but we have the import situation. In general, it is more imported than exported to the EU system. That means this is a red line here. You see, there is a change from the complete export towards a higher import compared to exports. This is a negative or the positive balance, no? So if you look at those as a general trend of the agriculture reform, we go one step further. We had these direct payments, the greenings, the young farmers, and the biggest issues. Small farms will be in a tailored way supported. Capping for big farms, because it was not understandable that really huge farms will receive additional support, and cross-compliance and the Green Deal with the eco schemes. We can compare the costs, but the costs are being reduced in terms of the share of the total budget, but the overall ceiling, while having more and more countries in the EU system over time, is more or less in absolute terms stable. That means you see this effect exactly here. What I explained now is we have more or less a stable absolute expenditure, capped expenditure. It is, of course, slightly shrinking, but we have more and more members in the EU system, from 12 to 28. Okay, that means per country, and of course in average, it is also in relative terms, it is shrinking. It is now below, in 2019, below 40% of the total budget is used for a common agriculture policy. Here you see now the pillar 2. These are the rural development programs. Just to show you, they will have more and more, this is towards 26, important share. Rural development programs will be more important. Pillar 1, there's a tendency to try to limit it, but again here the overall share of the common agriculture policy compared to the entire EU budget, the trend is will be below 30% in 26. If we now look at having in mind again in the different instruments and budget uses, it is just to understand it, what happened at EU level. We have export subsidies, they are phased out. We have other market systems, they are lower and lower support, the market support, what we had at the beginning. Rural development programs are relatively more and more important. The decoupled payments is exactly this area, decoupling what I explained in the effect. And the share is shrinking. The CAP expenditures compared as a share of total expenditures at EU level. Okay? If we now go towards one step further, rural development environmental programs, you see here already the share of the environmental programs, and you see the greening measures, what we had already. That means also here a shift towards sustainable intensification on the one hand side, but direct payment for environmental friendly management practices. And this is here as a trend very important. And this is as a share from the decoupled direct payments. Okay, any question? And this is exactly what I wanted to express here: the greening, crop diversification, permanent grassland maintenance, or the 5% arable land to areas beneficial for biodiversity as as the biggest bundle here. If we look now at those which the direct payments, we have here the relative importance of direct payments across the countries. Malta has the biggest share of direct payments for very much tailored subsidy programs to farmers, and others have very little and have already in Pillar 2 in Malta and in Denmark, for example, very high direct support measures. And there is a tendency to try to level out those across the countries. And this is what is intended to do here. This is a line of 27, EU 27 average. And this is a line what should be intended to level out, to reduce on the one hand side and to increase those in the direct support for those which are not higher, not very high in terms of share. If you look at the direct payments, we have the 3 direct payments are basic schemes, greening, and young farmers as the major part, but it's just to let you know the high diversity across the countries in terms of the programs. And the question is it good or not? Yes, it is good, because they can tailor their programs to the needs at a region explicit level. That means what regions need, they need also then tailored concepts at a regional level. Okay. And now I try to explain, and I would just ask you, what time is it now? It is 1 o'clock. We can now go as a wrap up, or do you need a 10 minutes break?
Depends how long the wrap up is.
The wrap up is.
I feel like I need a break. Honestly, I'm like losing my attention span.
Okay, then we have a 10 minutes break.
Sure.
Great. Then we will meet at 1. I would say 1:15, and then we have 45 minutes to have this overview. But I try to wrap it up. But I think it is quite interesting now how the actual design of policies to have in mind the background what we had in the first lessons. Okay. Then we will meet at 1:15.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And in 10 minutes, we will meet again. Great. And let me remind you then that the first pillar was the direct support, and now I explain the rural development programs. And we had also very tailored measures for environments in this pillar. And if we look at those axes, we had this at the very beginning, the leader axis and the competitive axis, really looking at a high competitiveness of, for example, young farmers, IT technologies to accelerate and to be competitive in the market. These support, these subsidies intend to increase this. Then environmental and land management, ecosystems and landscape amenities, and climate change here as a big problem. Green Deal is very much related to climate adaptation and mitigation, and the diversification and quality of life. This is more the village programs, diversification of economics, economies, activities, and so on at a rural level. But these are, for us now, not very interesting. We look at the environmental management today, and this is a European Agriculture Fund for Rural Development. If we go now to the different measures, you see now that in each of those measures, and just to have an idea of how these environmental programs look like, in the first X, we have here modernization of agriculture holdings. I give you some examples. Infrastructure related to the development and adaptation, restoring agriculture production potential, then information and promotion activities, and so on. These are more the competitiveness, what I said. And the environment ones, these are maybe the payments for farmers in areas with handicaps, other than mountain areas, less favorable areas. Then Natura 2000 payments and for Natura 2000s for habitats. Then agri-environmental payments for management practices. And animal welfare payments. This is also the environment part. First, afforestation of land, agricultural land, afforestation activities, afforestation of non-agricultural land, Natura 2000 payments, non-productive investments. You see here the range of very clearly tailored concepts with tailored objectives. Rural viability, diversification, issues on agriculture activities, then Axis 3, support for business creation and development, encouragement, all these village economic tailored concepts, village renewal and development issues, and so on. And the leader, this is what I explained at the very beginning, the leader programs are more in the implementation of local strategies, competitiveness, environment issues, but more the proposals you can hand in at a community level for certain initiatives. Okay? Any question with regard to those? No. But maybe please have in mind the Axis 2 of the Rural Development Program environment has also a certain greening component in the Axis 1, and you can mirror them, you can compare them, the two issues. We will do so in a moment. That means there are two different funds, and they fund the same direction of payments. If we look at those now, we can see that the budget, that very little is spent for the leader and for the technical support, Axis 3 for the quality of life in rural areas is 13%, and the biggest shares are improving the competitiveness, it's number one, axis number one, and improving the environment. And here can be contradictory objectives, and it can be objectives that are conflicting with the direct support. That means this coherence of all those goals is not always given. If you look at the cost items, you see what kind of costs rural development programs have. You see, and this is very interesting, administration, controls, system controls, audit and certification, monitoring programs, reporting, and general management. You see, there are widespread costs, and to cover those costs, the premiums are given. If you look at the axis 2 only now, this is the environment column, this axis 2, we see different programs. It is now a more detailed insight from exactly, just let me go back. This is the axis 2, just not to lose the overview of rural development programs. And in this axis 2, we go now into detail and see, okay, here are the agri-environmental payments. Here is exactly the tailored program for environmental friendly management. Here is exactly the payments for farmers in areas with handicaps, less favorable areas, to compensate maybe disadvantages in certain regions. Here we have the natural handicap payments for farmers in mountain areas, less favorable areas. We have first afforestation of agricultural land, to afforest, to build forests here. We have the number of restoration forestry potential and introduction of prevention actions, non-productive investments, etc., etc. You have here the widespread tailored design of the environmental programs. And I give you now the implementation example in Germany, because what we said is, you saw the rural development program at the very beginning. I gave you the priority areas at EU level, which have been defined very precise. And now you have to mirror this at a member state level and to comply with this, to work for this goal. The priority areas at EU level match with now the implementation using the example in Germany, how it's called the EPLR programs is designed at a member state level. That is matching EU level with a national level and then going down to the state level. We will have a look at those. The development plans for the rural area, look at all objectives and measures of the second pillar that are classified in these EPLR programs. These programs, just as an overview, 88 national and regional programs in Europe, in Belgium, Germany, Spain, Italy, UK, defined as regional programs, in some other member states, like in France, defined as additional programs for islands. This is just widespread diversity also in these rural development programs. And if we look now at the German case, we see here agri-environmental payments, modernization of agriculture holdings, very specific and tailored programs. Payments to farmers in areas with other than mountains, infrastructure, village renewal, conservation and upgrading of rural heritages, implementing local development strategies, and so on. And you saw in this agri-environmental payments here, you see, and do you remember now, our case of the buffer zone program, how to protect open water bodies from pesticides leaching? This would be exactly here in the agri-environmental payment setting, in the first column, this is the biggest share. And how it will be designed, we had this at the other example, it will be the state level, the local level, there will be a tailored program set up for agri-environmental payments for a buffer zone program. Just to explain you now, the circle is closing, and this is the example at the beginning can be exactly here in the agri-environmental payments. If we look at the implementation—
One question.
Yeah. Yes.
Can you go back? What's
yes.
Can you give an example for a non-productive investment?
A non-productive investment would be something not. We have to look it up. I don't have all the details, but non-productive investment would be nothing like support of the production investment. It would be, I can imagine it would be, but we have to look it up. Shall I look it up right now? Non-productive, it would be, for example, for villages, a certain new square. It would be a village renewal, you're right. It would be, maybe others have an idea?
To create public goods, for example.
Public goods, yeah. It would be exactly what is not related to business. Maybe maintenance of a national park in a village. Okay. That would be maybe my answer.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Something that is not related to business, but it is related to exactly public goods. Is what is a good hint, yeah. Other questions? No? Okay. Then if we see the overview of these kind of rural development programs in this Entwicklungsplan, in the rural development plan, we see that it is regional, it differs regionally at a regional level. That means we have here in this area, there is a high production of porks, of pigs fattening, very high competitiveness shares. That means also you see the bubble, the bigger the bubble, the more money is involved. You see a lot of money for competitiveness, exactly in the region of Vechta, etc. And here we see also the biggest bubble from Bavaria, but with the highest environmental share. That means here in this area, I go with the mouse over, I try to indicate it. Here, this is the highest greening, I would say, green intention, the agri-environmental programs. Here you have the highest competitiveness to being competitive as a farm. Here in Baden-Württemberg, you have the same like in Bavaria. And you see it differs quite a lot. And in the eastern part of Germany, of course, you have the highest share for the rural development because the infrastructure was for many years behind, and there's a strong to catch up with the average infrastructure. They were tailored more for infrastructure. That's quite interesting that according to the needs, it's a needs-based approach, different programs will be set up. And this is taken up also now in the last step of the agriculture reform that was recently agreed. This is just to have an overview on the total amount. And you see here in Bavaria, you have the biggest share, in Baden-Württemberg, the second biggest. Then you have in Brandenburg, Berlin, also quite high in Sachsen-Anhalt, and in Niedersachsen and Bremen with a high competitive share. You see that also the national co-financing issue is always given, and the additional national supplementary budget can be given in the sense of financing the programs. What I wanted to draw the attention here is now again on the buffer zone program. or on the design of the environmental programs, you see the complexity. I already explained it at the beginning, but I just wanted to say how many authorities are involved. The complexity is very high. The EU Commission is checking and auditing examination of the program itself, whether it's coherent, and they are trying to coordinate to have a certain coherence across the policy objectives. The farmers are here, and now the tailored regional programs will be set up. That means in our buffer zone program, only where sensitive regions are, only where the risk of leaching of pesticides is very high, this zoning, these areas will be designated to implement a certain buffer zone program to mitigate leaching of pesticides in open water body. Only in those regions and not per se in the entire entire Germany, across entire Germany. Okay. So if you look at those CAP outlook now, I don't go into detail here, but there are certain new objectives. They are widespread, and I'll also not open it here right now because you can also see it on the internet. But what is interesting as an exercise, and we can do it either, we can do it here, but I think we are also, in terms of time, we have half past, we have like 15 minutes. I will just show it to you. I try to show it and to open it. But if you look at those objectives at the Common Agriculture Policy, you have the link here. You can open it as well, because you can also open my slides from the Moodle system. And we have performance indicator. The performance indicator, luckily, they match with the objectives in most cases. You find them on the increase of competitiveness. You find then farming income support. You find, no, that is exactly financing the CAP, that is exactly not matching, but you find in most cases matching events like ensure fair income. And then you have farming income support. That means the performance indicators should match with the objective, and you can have a look at those. And now it comes to real work. If we look and open now the performance indicator, I just do it now, and I try to stop my slides and to go into the performance indicators into the home page. These are hopefully the performance indicators. And you see then farm income, support market, soil quality. We go to soil quality, and there are well-defined indicators that allow for a monitoring and a controlling the objectives. That means we have then normally defined the objective at the very beginning, and we see as a monitoring well-defined indicators like crop diversity on EU farmlands, like share of Common Agriculture Policy beneficiaries subject to crop diversification, and so on. You see then here very tailored indicators, and these indicators should, of course, be increased by the goals. And there will be always a comparison between the goals, which I explained, and the performance indicator. And the contextual indicators, I will not go into detail here, but please have a look at those, is that you need certain contextual indicators like number of population, how many hectares, and so on. And with both, you draw a certain you draw a certain modeling task on those. That is a provision of the data in order to come up with impact assessments. It can be modeling, it can be heuristic impact assessment, but they are control measures. And this is what we are doing. And this is also what have been done at the beginning with the modeling task, which I on the buffer zone program. Please have a look at the question here, and you see the link. This is the link where it is explained how it will be designed at the EU level to have in the annex the different models, what kind of models are involved, and how these models will be used in order to control the matching of the goals with the performance indicator which have been defined. This is a control of how to control agriculture reform processes. Okay, do we have a question with regard to those? No. Now, what is new on the environmental policies? I gave you some examples on certain programs. And the scheme in Pillar 1, you see here also the link. You can shift money now from the support, direct support towards the ecosystems. That means you can tailor as a member state now your own program a better way. It's more tailored according to the needs of the region with the ecosystem, eco scheme in Pillar 1. I will, because the decision on the program itself will be taken by the member state. I will give you now 3 examples. Example 1 is the climate change. In Pillar 1, you have the ecosystem now designed by the member state. They will do maintaining climate-friendly farming on peatlands. And the peatlands, of course, you know, a lot of CO2 is fixed there, and we need to avoid a release of CO2 emissions. That means application of plot deculture techniques, a certain technique that hinders CO2 release. And second pillar is climate management commitments to reduce reduce use of water, with special attention to have a coherence policy on climate. That means you see the goal setting, the goal direction should be the same and not anymore conflicting. This is to match Pillar 1 and Pillar 2 goals and to have coherent complementary objectives. Example number 2 on biodiversity. Ecosystem 2 will be in Pillar 1 will be an ecosystem that means supporting the presence of an even greater density of landscape features. There's 10% minimum of 10% of agricultural land devoted to hedges, rows, and trees to have a more diversified land. And ecosystem 1 would be supporting the presence of an even greater density of landscape features. 70% of agricultural land devoted to hedges, rows, and trees. You see from 2 angles the same support of the same issue of having more hedges in the landscape. And in Pillar 2, the member state is now because member states are responsible for ecosystem, eco scheme 1 and 2. And now they look also for Pillar 2, where they're responsible for the state level. Let's look at the environmental management commitments and let's establish a buffer strip around or along landscape features. This is exactly what we had, the buffer strip program. And looking at stripes, what to intend to implement there. And this is a management of landscapes features. And you see all 3 activities are bundled towards the same goal. And this is the intention to have a more coherent goal setting of the different funding instruments. Last but not least, the coherence water would be pillar 2 and 1. One would say limitation of nutrient leakages, establishment of green cover before next spring crops. That means green cover, there is no leaching or hindered leaching. Nitrogen cannot, or nutrients cannot leak to the open water bodies. In pillar 2, they say limitation of nutrient use and leakage, maximum 13 kilogram N. That means the input in pillar 2 is limited, not more than a certain upper threshold is allowed. Reduced use of pesticides, maximum 3 reference dose of plant protection instead of 4 or 5. That means there is a reduction of the inputs, at the same time a better coverage of the green cover. A green cover, that means the entire package is less nutrients and pesticides leaked into the open water body. Okay? Looking at the coherences of activities of policies. And this is what is being done. And this is done by giving the competence in the ecosystem, in the eco schemes to the member states. The member states will decide, or the state level will decide in the design of those. And it's not anymore a general design at EU level. So, and now the last 2 slides, and then we are through, and then we may have a short feedback also to improve it. The Green Deal is now really to look at the efficient use of the resources and to look on the biodiversity and the climate issues. And this is it's an action plan, to be very simplistic. The Green Deal is new, and the Common Agriculture Reform, what I explained here, is tailored to make it fit to the Green Deal at EU level. And this was recently agreed, the Green Deal, and in 2050 there are certain goals, and the major goal is to be climate neutral. And what is now then done is reaching this target will require certain actions. That means investment in environmental friendly technologies. This is what we heard. Also some examples given. Supporting industry to innovate, rolling out cleaner, cheaper, healthier forms of private transport. And the energy sector, of course, is decarbonizing the sector and ensuring buildings are more efficient and so on. Not all agriculture relevant, but also in terms of technology, environmental friendly programs. Of course, this is a big emphasis also in agriculture. And if we look now at those, we had already a look at the Green Deal targets, the first column. We have then impact indicators. They look for how it is at the moment, how policy impacts look like, to quantify and qualify certain indicators, and then the output and result indicators, and they will be then used. Give you just one example: reducing by 50% the use and risk of chemical pesticides. The output indicator would be sustainable pesticide use, share of agricultural land concerned by supported specific actions which lead to a sustainable use of pesticides. This is now at to make fit Green Deal, the overall deal with the Common Agriculture Policy, to harmonize both. And this output and result indicator is exactly part of the rural priority areas in the rural program or in the eco scheme. That means we have now the member states and state levels, they have to tailor their programs to match with this overall guiding objectives at EU level. Okay? This is how it looks like and how they interact. And they do it with framework regulations and with directives and with decisions. Decisions for specific groups of people, directives with commitments, regulations with a framework where the member state has to find the instruments to target these objectives. So, with this, to you, a big question. What do you think in terms of your feedback? Can you just give me hints? What should be improved? Even more interaction? Or what do you think in terms of didactically coming from theory towards actual implementation? What can be improved? Please just give me some feedback.
I thought it was quite interesting, and I've learned quite a lot about CAP in the last year just from other classes. Yeah. And I think an interesting thing to also include would be the limitations of CAP, because there's also a lot of discussion on how indicators are monitored at the EU level and the sort of the limitations of the eco schemes that are decided on member state level. And I think talking about those limitations gives a much more rounded picture on the actual effectiveness of CAP policy, which draws into a lot of really good questions that could be really good discussion questions to involve more student participation.
Great, thank you. And what would you improve also in an open way? Because sometimes it is a bit like the interaction in an online session is, of course, always more difficult, but would you do more interaction?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that the most effective thing that I've seen with online classes in this last semester is to even have a bit of material that the students have to review beforehand in class and to be able to have discussion about that.
Okay, yeah, material beforehand, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because it really inspires students to share what they've learned in their own sort of learning process with the group.
Great, thank you. Are there others who would like to just to say feedback, a comment? Thank you very much.
I can give some feedback.
Yeah.
I would say sometimes like the amount of text on one particular slide could be a bit overwhelming.
Okay.
Sometimes because like I don't know. It's kind of hard to process when there's just like so many like small words on a slide, and like the amount is fine, but maybe if they were like split up onto multiple slides with bigger text.
Yeah, okay.
Because sometimes it's just like it's just an overwhelming amount of information all on one page, you know?
Okay, that's fine. Yes, it's a good hint. Yeah, to reduce text. Yeah.
Like content-wise, it's fine. I think we should be able to like uptake that amount of information, but we need to just split it up a little bit more, I think.
Great. And in terms of these, that's fine. And if you ask you also, or also Dominic, I don't know whether you're there, but people who just raise quite often in the discussion their voice, is it didactically also good that coming from theory towards this implementation, that you have really a better picture, what also Rosa said, a better picture on CAP from a different perspective? Is it in terms of, you know, a redesign of the lecture is not needed? In logic-wise or didactically?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for anyone else, but I think it's okay to start with the theory and then go into the actual application.
Okay. And what I have now is to reduce text and to have material beforehand, guiding material beforehand, also sent to the Moodle system that you can before just read small text in order to come into the topic. That's a very good idea and hint. Yeah.
Right. I also think that you sometimes skip the breakout sessions because we are short in time. But for me, it's pretty hard to follow 4 hours of content input from your side without having those breakout sessions, because I think it's it's really interesting, but it's so hard to follow like 4 hours in a row. And it's way easier if you have small breakout sessions, maybe only 5 minutes to repeat the already learned, or also maybe to have some short discussions. Otherwise, I cannot really adapt the contents.
Yeah, okay, I fully understand. Yeah, to have more of these short breaks. Yeah, good.
There's another comment in the chat from Undine. She says that she'd appreciate if we stick to the 4 semester Wochenstunden framework and take regular breaks. And yeah, I support that too.
Yeah, it is very long and it's a lot of material, no? Yeah, that's true.
And maybe if possible, like if breakout sessions are not an option, sometimes just like watch a video or something like that. It's just something different than just watching or looking at the PowerPoint the whole time.
Okay, video and timing. Yeah, that means that's also interesting. I think what I do now in the next time for the next generation is maybe to do it that flexible, that because there are now fewer students than before, because it's not because of the course, it's because of the number of total students is reduced. I don't know why. You may know the reason, but that means we have more space, more time, that I can do it that flexible, that if I see, for example, next time we will have few contributions, that I then completely reschedule and have in the next, I would have now time to do more, no? Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you also, Teresa. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. And
I have another feedback, which maybe as well covers a bit what the others said. But one is that it's like a lot of input, and well, if we then have like had the breakout rooms, it was like sometimes we got thrown in, or like we got lots of information, and then we have to maybe discuss about a new topic, which can be good. But I think what Rosa de Rosa said is that sometimes it's helpful if we get some information before and some time to kind of get deeper in the lots of information. What is really good, like I like the presentation with all the information, but to get some time to let it kind of to go deeper and to follow up on that on another point of time, like because it's like really fast.
Yeah, that's also a good hint, maybe to have material at the beginning, but maybe also the breakout descriptions also beforehand, that you may become familiar with the topic already and say, okay, I will have to discuss this. This is a document, but then you are prepared also for the breakout discussions. And I have also the feeling that I did not put them that much in as emphasis, but I should have done it a better way. Yeah.
I would say more, instead of substituting like breakout, instead of like having breakout room time like before, I would substitute more of like the content where you're just speaking at us. That could be more stuff that everyone has to read on their own time. Yeah, because it's just like content about like the CAP, for example. We could have read a little bit about it and then dedicate a larger proportion of the class time to actual like discussion and like more breakout rooms, you know, because I think all of us would have been down to like read a paper about it, or like an information assignment or something, you know, and then like we all have like a minimum level of knowledge before class even starts, and then we don't have to like spend an hour going over it again, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. That's also good.
Like some type of homework, because I feel like, I don't know, I barely get homework from these classes. So like I have time to like read a little bit beforehand. I don't want to like put extra work on other people, but for myself, like I would be happy to read something.
Okay, that's great. Yeah. That's nice. It is very, very helpful, to be honest. No, it's